A few years ago, my sister Lori said to me, I've read a book that you need to read, and you need then to teach it to everyone that you can teach it to. And it was this book called The Gospel of Ruth by a woman named Carolyn Custis James. And if you know this book, then you're going to think, Kathy's kind of plagiarizing her today, and I just want to give her all credit right now so that on camera, if I sound like her, that's probably right. Surprisingly today, and if you know me at all, surprisingly today I'm going to talk about submission. And I'm not good at it. I don't like the word. I feel like it's kind of been co-opted by masculinity. And yet it is a word that comes up in Scripture a lot. And so there has to be a right way of looking at submission. This is not a submission that says, I get the last word and you must obey. This is not a submission this is a submission that is rooted in Hesed. And Luke last week mentioned Hesed. He was talking about kindness. And in this story that we're reading, each of the characters practices submission to one another. It's a submission that is steeped in mutuality. It's a foreshadowing of the life of the gospel. It's a foreshadowing of Jesus Christ. And the Bible's version of submission, which surprisingly or unsurprisingly addresses both men and women, takes us to a whole new realm of human relationships. It invites us into the Hesed of God and asks us to live by the standard and example of love, of this kind of love. And New Testament writers never talk about submission without also talking about Jesus. Jesus' version of submission is thoughtful and strong and purposeful. It's sacrificial. It involves a full determined embrace of the Father's will, which governs everything that Jesus does, and the voluntary pouring out of his life to a lost world. Jesus' submission is redemptive. It's the gospel, and it's the way that we show Jesus to the world. I say all of this because in chapter 3 of the book of Ruth, it is a chapter that's all about mutual submission and Hesed. So what is Hesed? Before I even read this to you, I'm going to talk about that. Because it's actually a word that in English we have no translation for. I've tried to study this word, and the one translation I found was 2 pages long, because there's no good word in English to talk about what Hesed is. It is God's loyal and unrelenting love. It generates hope and joy. I'm not going to read 2 full pages of definition to you right now, but it is only used in cases where there is a recognized tie between people. So we don't talk about random acts of kindness as Hesed. Hesed implies that there is a covenant between people, or between God and his people, and it implies that it motivates this loyal, selfless love that asks someone to do something that I don't really even have the right to ask you to do, and you willingly do it. Hesed is the gospel lived out because that's what Jesus did. He didn't have to, and at any point, Jesus, there's an old song, he could have called 10,000 angels to destroy the world and set him free. He had the freedom to walk away, and he didn't. It's the kind of love that we see most fully expressed in Jesus. And God's Hesed is the centerpiece of this story, as it should be. The entire book kind of zeroes in on the question that Naomi is asking, has God's Hesed run out for her? You know, at the beginning of the story, and Leon is my brother-in-law, he wasn't here. Luke talked about that in the first few chapters of Ruth, there's a famine. Elimelech takes his family, Naomi and their sons, to Moab, where they marry, and then they all die. All the men die. Elimelech dies, Mahlon, Chilion, they die. And there are 3 widows left alone. And Naomi's asking this question because you've probably experienced by now, and if you haven't, you probably will. That sounds also like something my dad would say. That sometimes faith doesn't make life easier. Sometimes it makes it more complicated. I have some friends who were in a horrible accident and their little boy died. One was horribly injured. 2 friends died. And a nurse said to this friend in the hospital, Scott, he's there wondering if his wife is going to live, "It must be a comfort to you to have faith." And he said, "Honestly, my faith makes this more difficult. If I were an atheist, I would understand the laws of physics and chance, and I could just accept that things like this happen. But I believe in a God who is love." Sometimes that makes things more difficult. And at the end of chapter 2, Naomi sees that God's hesed is still there for her. It's still meant for her. And we're going to start there. We're going to start at the end of chapter 2, and I'm going to read all the way to the end of chapter 3. So I'm starting in verse 19, and I think it's up here. It says, her mother-in-law, this is Ruth's mother-in-law, Naomi. Her mother-in-law asked her, "Where did you glean today? Where did you work? Blessed be the man who took notice of you." Ruth and Naomi have come back to Bethlehem, but they're widows. They have no means of support, and Ruth has been gleaning in the fields. She's following the harvesters and picking up the grain that they leave behind to feed them. Then Ruth told her mother-in-law about one at whose place she had been working. "The name of the man I worked with today is Boaz." "The Lord bless him," Naomi said to her daughter-in-law. "He has not stopped showing his kindness." That's hesed. He has not stopped showing his hesed to the living and the dead. She added, "This man is our close relative. He is one of our kinsman redeemers." The word is goel. Then Ruth the Moabitess said, "He even said to me, 'Stay with my workers until they finish harvesting all my grain.'" And Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, "It will be good for you, my daughter, to go with his girls, because in someone else's field you might be harmed." So Ruth stayed close to the servant girls of Boaz to glean until the barley and the wheat harvests were finished, and she lived with her mother-in-law. Chapter 3. One day, Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, should I not try to find a home for you where you will be well provided for? Is not Boaz, with whose servant girls you have been, a kinsman of ours? Tonight he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. Wash and perfume yourself and put on your best clothes. Then go down to the threshing floor, but don't let him know you're there until he's finished eating and drinking, when he's in a really good mood. When he lies down, note the place where he is lying, then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do." "I will do whatever you say," Ruth answered. So she went down to the threshing floor and did everything her mother-in-law told her to do. When Boaz had finished eating and drinking and was in good spirits, he went over to lie down at the far end of the grain pile, and Ruth approached quietly, uncovered his feet, and lay down. In the middle of the night, something startled the man, and he turned and discovered a woman lying at his feet. "Who are you?" he asked. "I am your servant Ruth," she said. "Spread the corner of your garment over me, for you are a kinsman redeemer, a goel." "The Lord bless you, my daughter," he replied. "This kindness, this hesed, is greater than that which you have shown earlier. You have not run after younger men, whether rich or poor. And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all you ask. All my fellow townsmen know that you are a woman of noble character." A hayil is the word. "Although it is true that I am near of kin, there is a kinsman redeemer nearer than I. Stay here for the night, and in the morning, if he wants to redeem, good, let him redeem. But if he's not willing, as surely as the Lord lives, I will do it. Lie here until morning." So she lay at his feet until morning, but got up before anyone could be recognized. And he said, Don't let it be known that a woman came to the threshing floor. He also said, bring me the shawl you are wearing and hold it out. And when she did so, he poured it into 6 measures of barley and put it on her. And then she went back to town. When Ruth came to her mother-in-law, Naomi asked, how did it go, my daughter? And then she told her everything that Boaz had done for her and added, he gave me these 6 measures of barley, saying, don't go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed. Then Naomi said, wait, my daughter, until you find out what happens, for this man will not rest until the matter is settled today. It helps us to remember, this is a strange story, first of all, and it helps us to remember that God is still the hero of this story. This is a story about God. And it is part of the bigger story of the Bible. And the Bible centers on revealing the transforming work of God in human hearts. And so each part of what transpires is deeply embedded in what has happened before. The mystery of what transpires on the threshing floor is heightened by the fact that Naomi is the instigator. And because in our Western thought, we like romances, we often tend to think this is a romance and maybe Boaz is just dragging his feet and Naomi's going to give him a little push. That is not what's happening here. Naomi has woken up from her despondency. She says, God has remembered me after all. And she remembers Ruth. And she remembers that if she dies, Ruth will be left alone. A foreigner, a widow who is barren and has no protection in this land. And a woman's only viable option for security in this world is the one that Naomi mentioned in chapter 1 when she prayed for Orpah and Ruth and said, go and find rest in the house of another husband. Within the ancient culture, marriage was a practical arrangement. It was a place of security and safety and rest from the perils of poverty and widowhood. If Naomi's plan succeeds, Ruth will marry Boaz, and Naomi will go to her grave in peace. And it's interesting that in chapter 2, she calls Boaz a kinsman redeemer, but when she sends Ruth out, she's not asking her to make that demand of Boaz. She says, Boaz is our kin. Go and lay at his feet, and he'll tell you what to do. That is her script. She's supposed to just lay at his feet, and when Boaz notices, he's going to know she's taken off her widow's clothes, she's put on perfume, he's going to know she's proposing marriage, and he gets to say yay or nay. He could say, here, let me give you 6 more ephahs, 65 pounds of grain, and send you home to Naomi, and I'll just do that for you every month. He could say that. He could embarrass her. He could humiliate her. But Naomi knows that this is a man of valor. And she knows him as one of their relatives. And Ruth also knows him because she's been working in his field probably for 7 or 8 weeks by now. The sacrifice that Naomi makes is actually quite staggering. This is Naomi in submission, sacrificing everything she has for Ruth. Because in these intervening weeks, it says Naomi came, she says, I went out full to Moab. I had a husband and sons, and the hope of grandsons, because sons were all that mattered. But I came back empty. But in these intervening weeks, she's discovered 2 things. Yahweh has not forgotten her. His hesed still surrounds her. And second, she has watched her daughter-in-law go in and out every day, working really hard to feed her. She isn't as empty as she thought she was. God has blessed her life with Ruth. And later, Naomi's friends describe Ruth as your daughter-in-law who loves you. Naomi is pouring herself out for Ruth. She's giving up all that she has to protect Ruth. And this is what God's kingdom looks like on earth. But there is no man to speak for Ruth. A marriage is arranged. There is no father, there is no brother, there is no one to speak for Ruth. She has no bargaining power at all. She has no dowry, she has no social connections, there's no political advantage to marrying Ruth, and she's been barren for 10 years of marriage. So there's not even really a lot of hope she'll bear a son. All other considerations, there is no romance in marriage in this society. This is about security, important social, economic, political connections. This is about gaining something for both sides. And based on the culture's standards for evaluating brides, Ruth does not factor at all. So Naomi's plan could go horribly wrong, but Naomi is not recklessly throwing her daughter-in-law to the wolves. She is wisely and sensitively selecting a man who has showed himself to be a man of character, and Ruth knows that as well. So following Naomi's instructions, Ruth will signal to Boaz that she is available for marriage. A widow coming out of mourning, perfume in the air, uncovering his feet in the posture of a petitioner. It is a weird story sometimes. Naomi unfolds this rule-bending plan, a work-around-the-system plan, and it takes place in the middle of the night so that no one will be ashamed if it doesn't work. But she doesn't count on Ruth's spirit of hesed. She doesn't count on Ruth's desire to act on Naomi's behalf. Ruth has not forgotten the pledge she made back in chapter 1. Where you go, I will go. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. This is Ruth's vow to Naomi. So Ruth is going to bring as much resourcefulness and energy and devotion to Naomi in this challenge as she has to everything else. So in verse 9 we see Boaz's feet are cold and something wakes him up. And he sees the outline of a woman next to him in the dark, and he says, "Who are you?" And here, Ruth completely tosses Naomi's script out. Because what she's supposed to do, she's supposed to sit quietly and wait for Boaz to tell her what to do. But instead, she identifies herself. I am Ruth. And then she instructs Boaz to spread your covering, your wing is the same word as Salome was reading from Psalm 91. Spread your covering, your wing over me. Now, when Boaz met Ruth, he said, Yahweh has spread his wing over you and will protect you. And she's feeding this language back to him. Now you spread your wing over me and protect me. But she doesn't stop there. She says, you are a close relative. You are a Goel. You are a kindred redeemer. And in that single sentence, she appeals to the Levirate and the kinsman redeemer laws of the Israelite people. She is clearly proposing marriage. Boaz is certain of that. That's not a question. But by asking him to be a kinsman redeemer, she is stating her intention. She intends to bear a child that will become the heir of Elimelech. This child will not be Boaz's heir. She wants Boaz to buy back all of Elimelech's property, and then she's going to bear a son, and that son will be the heir of Elimelech. Why does Ruth speak up this way? Because she would never turn away from Naomi. She's never going to start thinking about herself. She is all hesed for Naomi. Ruth and Boaz have both exhibited incredible godly character. And so we expect no less from them here. Ruth does nothing to compromise Boaz. She doesn't scream. She doesn't say, this man won't stop touching me, and then he has to marry her. She doesn't do any of those things. And he doesn't do that to her. She risks refusal and public humiliation because now, instead of just asking him to marry her and protect her, she has started a legal process that will be public in the community. In every Israelite family, there are two paramount issues. The first is the survival of the family name, and the second is keeping the family land in family hands. The Elimelech family has lost both. Famine drove them off their land, and the deaths of Elimelech and his sons threatened the family with extinction. And Levirate law addresses this. Levirate law says that when a man dies without an heir, it is his brother's responsibility to marry her and impregnate her, and she will have a son, and that son will be considered the heir of the dead brother. This was the duty of the brother-in-law, and if he didn't do it, he brought shame on his family. And we've seen that in other stories from the Old Testament. Tamar, who also features in the lineage of Jesus. Levirate law, and then the kinsman redeemer law focuses on the land. So this encompasses a wider range of relatives. It doesn't have to be the brother, but it's the nearest relative. If someone falls on hard times and they have to sell their property, the nearest relative is expected to step in and buy it back. Either buy it from the person on hard times or buy it from the outsider so that family land stays in the tribe. Both laws are costly. Both laws involve great sacrifice. If a father's estate is divided between the sons, so if one son dies, that actually increases the inheritance of the others. So if you go and create a new heir, you are dividing up your inheritance further. He is spoiling his inheritance, in a sense. But it was the Hesed way of doing things. The kinsman redeemer faced similar problem because it required a great outlay of money and resources to buy back someone else's land. And because having sons was the most important thing, you know this kinsman redeemer has sons who are expecting an inheritance that has now gotten smaller because they've stepped in to buy back land for someone else. This wasn't just a legal code, it was a call to a higher way of living. It was a call to sacrifice, and it is the gospel in the Old Testament. In ancient Israelite society, it simply wasn't possible to combine levels of honor and stature that Boaz clearly possessed with the postponement of marriage or the absence of sons. We like to think, and I was taught this way too many times as I was growing up, that Boaz saw Ruth and he liked her. And here's this wealthy bachelor who's just waiting for this beautiful woman to come along, and he's going to marry her. But it's hard for us in our culture and time to comprehend just how much hinges on producing sons. The family had no future without sons. Instead of being a man of valor, Boaz would have been a disgrace to his family if he had reached his age and stature without sons. And instead of being admired, he would have been pitied. We don't know if Boaz had a living wife, or two, or three. We don't know if he was a widower. It doesn't matter. Given the culture at the time and Boaz's age, it's almost certain he had sons of his own and their inheritance to consider, and that raises the stakes of this decision considerably. So although our reading in the Bible takes us into ancient patriarchal culture, a system that devalued women, the Bible simultaneously introduces laws that regulate that system to protect the weakest members of society and dismantle the ethics that drive that system. That is the gospel in the Old Testament. The kingdom God intends to establish on earth is a kingdom where both sons and daughters are equally valued. Hesed is our way of living, and Jesus defines that paradigm for our relationships. And here at the threshing floor in this exchange between Boaz and Ruth, we get a glimpse of how the kingdom is supposed to look. She presses for hesed, and he not only joins her cause once again, but he also takes an active role in overthrowing the culture's view of women with the words that he speaks to Ruth. He speaks words of kindness and praise. Reassurance flows from his mouth. He says, "And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you what you ask." And he turns the ancient patriarchal system, which literally means ruled by fathers, ruled by men, he turns it upside down. Ruth is an impoverished, foreign widow who is barren. She is worthless in that society's eyes. And I don't say that lightly because I don't like saying anybody's worthless, especially a woman. But in that society, that's what she is. She is a throwaway. And Boaz foreshadows how Jesus would one day reach out to women who were rejected by communities to commission and empower them to serve him. What is also amazing is that Boaz uses here the same word, Hayil, that the narrator uses to call him a man of valor. And often in our translations, this word is kind of downgraded when it's translated for Ruth. They call her a woman of noble character. But she is a woman of valor, which means she is a warrior. This is what Boaz calls her. She is a woman who does hesed on behalf of Naomi. And not just for Naomi, but all of the family of Elimelech, the living and the dead. And Naomi says that God continues to show hesed to the living and the dead. Boaz listens. He doesn't take offense. He weighs her words carefully. Ruth is stretching the Levirate law. Boaz is not a brother to Elimelech. He might be a cousin. He has perfectly legal rights to walk away from this. And then he is also not the nearest relative, so he could also walk away from redeeming the land. But his heart also belongs to Yahweh, and he too lives out the hesed of God, and so Boaz pledges to be that safety net for Naomi and for Ruth and Elimelech. We are watching Boaz now submit and pour out himself for Naomi, for Ruth, and for Elimelech. And this is a powerful act of submission because the issues Ruth raises are not his responsibility. Oh, I'm missing a page. So now I'm just going to ad-lib. Is that really true? Am I really missing a page? 3. Yeah, great. I get to just end this all on my own. There's nothing about this that minimizes Boaz. The fact that he submits and acts, that he's outnumbered and swayed by 2 women, does not make him, it doesn't feminize him, it doesn't make him less masculine. In fact, it gives him stature. It increases his understanding of who God is. Hesed is the gospel lived out. Actually, who needs the last page? There it is, right there. Hesed is the gospel lived out. And Jesus demonstrates that over and over again when he willingly takes up his cross and goes to die. I'm going to pray. Lord, we thank you for these women of valor. We thank you for Boaz. We thank you that these 3 people show us what it is to be image bearers of Christ who are working together as you planned. And we ask that you would continue to teach us through their example, that you would teach us to submit in the same way that Jesus did. Thank you for making that part of this community and showing us the way. Amen.